The long night should have been the endgame for Game of Thrones, and yes, I'm saying that with my full chest, my arms crossed, and my dragon glass ready. Because when you really think about it, the biggest problem with the Game of Thrones ending wasn't just rushed character arcs, or teleporting armies, or the fact that winter lasted about as long as a Starbucks holiday cup. No, the real issue was the order of the battles. The show spent 8 seasons screaming that death itself was coming.
In that darkness, the White Walkers came for the first time.
And then decided to deal with that problem early so we could wrap things up with a throne made of swords and some light urban redevelopment via Dragonfire. From the very beginning, Game of Thrones told us exactly how it should end. It just didn't listen to itself. The series opens not with kings, queens, or political scheming, but with a group of terrified Night's Watch men stumbling through the snow, running straight into something that clearly does not care about inheritance laws or royal bloodlines. One of them deserts, babbling about monsters, gets executed for it. And the audience is left thinking, okay, cool, so this story is about ice zombies and the end of the world. And then the show said, anyway, here's a bunch of politics, and ignored the apocalypse for an entire season, which was fine because the threat worked better that way. The White Walkers were patient, distant, unseen. Like a slow-moving disaster you know is coming but don't want to think about. That early setup is important because it frames the White Walkers as the real story. The Iron Throne was always just noise. Fun noise, dramatic noise, occasionally very naked noise, but still noise. The wall wasn't built to keep out wildlings. Wildlings are just people with bad PR and no indoor plumbing. The wall existed because something far worse was coming from the north. Something ancient. Something supernatural. Something that did not care who was currently sitting on a pointy chair in King's Landing. As the seasons went on, the mythology deepened. We learned about the Night King, the children of the forest, and the idea that this wasn't just another war, this was the war. The kind that makes all other conflicts feel small and kind of embarrassing in hindsight. And unlike everyone fighting over the Iron Throne, the Night King didn't want power. He didn't want recognition, he didn't even monologue, he wanted everyone dead. Efficiently. Permanently. And that made him far more dangerous than any human villain could ever be. The scariest part? Nobody believed in him. Westeros operated on a strict "pix or it didn't happen" policy. If you hadn't personally watched a corpse stand up and try to murder you, then congratulations, you were not convinced. Even when characters did see the White Walkers, they still struggled to accept what they were looking at. Dead people aren't supposed to move. Ice demons aren't supposed to exist. And yet, there they were, slowly building an army while the living argued about crowns and alliances like they had unlimited time. And that's where the missed opportunity really starts to hurt.
I did warn you not to trust me.
The fight for the Iron Throne completely distracted the realm from the actual threat. While Cersei was playing politics and everyone else was busy posturing, the Night King was out there doing the one thing he did best, adding more soldiers to his side. Every battle made him stronger. Every death worked in his favor. You can't negotiate with that. You can't outmaneuver it. You either stop it completely, or you lose everything. The moment that truly turned the Night King into an unstoppable force was the death of Viserion. That was the point where the show finally said, "Oh, you thought the wall was protection? That was cute." Giving the Night King a dragon should have been the beginning of the end. Instead, it was treated like a plot device to speed things up. Suddenly, the ultimate threat escalated, and then got resolved almost immediately. That's not payoff. That's narrative whiplash. And look, The Long Night was a good episode in isolation. The atmosphere was incredible. The chaos, the darkness, the confusion. It really did make you feel like you were in the middle of an impossible battle. Not being able to see clearly wasn't a flaw. It was the point. War against death itself shouldn't be clean or easy to follow. The problem wasn't how the battle is filmed. The problem was that it happened too soon and ended too fast. For 7 seasons, the show told us that fighting the dead was nearly impossible. Characters retreated from them constantly. At Hardhome, Jon Snow barely escaped with his life. At the Cave of the Three-Eyed Raven, Hodor literally held the door until death claimed him. The undead were overwhelming, relentless. And then, the moment they crossed the wall, they were suddenly beatable in a single night at Winterfell. Winterfell should not have survived. Full stop. That castle falling would have changed everything. It would have turned the White Walkers from a looming threat into an undeniable reality for the entire realm. Imagine the North collapsing, survivors fleeing south, heroes arriving at King's Landing not as conquerors but as refugees. The emotional weight alone would have been massive. Now let's talk characters, because this is where the story could have become legendary. Jon Snow's entire arc was built around the White Walkers. He wasn't meant to be king. He wasn't meant to win a political game he didn't care about. He was the guy screaming that the house was on fire while everyone else argued over who owned the furniture. Having him fail at Winterfell, only to regroup and lead the final stand later, would have made his journey feel complete instead of strangely sidelined. Daenerys, meanwhile, was always torn between destiny and destruction. Losing Winterfell, losing people she came north to save, and being forced to confront Cersei not as a conqueror, but as a desperate ally seeker, would have added real depth to her downfall. Her obsession with the throne would have felt more tragic if it was happening in the shadow of literal extinction. Sansa would have been vindicated. She understood logistics, food, and survival. Watching the North fall would have proven that no amount of bravery could stop the dead without unity. Arya still could have killed the Night King, just later, in a moment that felt earned by the entire story, not just a cool surprise. And Cersei? Oh, Cersei facing the Night King would have been perfect. She spent the entire series believing she was the ultimate survivor, convinced she could outlast anyone. Watching her realize that there was something she couldn't manipulate, threaten, or outsmart would have been poetic justice. Either she joins the fight, or she becomes another corpse in the army she refused to believe in. There were two clear ways to handle the Long Night properly. The first was letting Winterfell fall and turning the final episodes into a desperate, unified stand at King's Landing. Winter is finally arriving in the south, snow falling on the Iron Throne. Daenerys, vision of ash and ruin recontextualized as the cost of survival, not madness. The throne was destroyed not by ambition, but by necessity. The second option was even darker. Bran knows Winterfell will fall, he sees it, and some people still stay. Because hope is stubborn. Because people refuse to accept the end. That failure wouldn't make Bran useless. It would make fate unavoidable. The living retreat south anyway, carrying guilt, loss, and the knowledge that they were never really in control. Either way, the final battle should have been against death itself. Not politics. Not succession, not a chair. Because Game of Thrones didn't begin with the Iron Throne. It began with fear in the snow. It began with a warning no one believed. And the tragedy of the ending isn't just that it was rushed. It's that it forgot what story it was telling. The Long Night wasn't a subplot. It was the point. And maybe that's the real lesson of Game of Thrones. When you ignore the biggest threat because you're too busy fighting each other, the ending is never going to feel satisfying. So the next time you rewatch that opening scene Beyond the Wall, ask yourself this: what if the story had actually listened to its own warning? And what other moments in this world are quietly telling us how things are really supposed to end?